Hi there, welcome to another episode of The Confrontier. Thank you for watching. Today we will be having a look at society and also a certain synergy that I think exists in society. Now, you will find, while I am discussing this in a bit, that we are approaching a subject that is quite popular with, well, conspiracy theorists, you could say. And a little something about conspiracies before I really get started. You see, the thing is that conspiracy theorists are, in a sense, logical people. That might sound surprising, but I think there's a lot of truth in that, in the sense that they logically see some cause and effect of decisions being taken by governments, by companies, by shady organizations, and that's where things get, well, shady, that influence society and that have a goal. And they believe that lots of people are into that, are part of that conspiracy, and that it is something that they're working towards, and they do so step by step and with a very clear goal in mind. Now, the thing is that society and reality do not really work that logical or in such a logical fashion. In fact, we're mostly looking at messy developments. We're looking at individual people and individual parties trying to get the most out of the world. We're trying to see some pattern in how individual people, individual parties try to exploit the world, try to exploit society, you could see. And well, we're really not looking at something in which lots of people have the same goal in mind. In fact, rather than a clear path being followed and a plan being worked out and executed, we're looking at lots of self-interest conflicting with each other, but also aligning with other people's self-interest and other tendencies in society that lead to society as we see it today, and in which there are, frankly, as we all know, lots of ills. And in a sense, I think conspiracy theorists are onto something in the way that they, well, think something is wrong in society and that we, the people as a whole, are being fooled. And up to a certain degree, I would say that is indeed the case, but we're not looking at something like a big plan being undertaken. We're looking at individual interests, like I said, aligning with each other and creating something, well, dangerous, large, malignant, you could say. But the thing is, much like other things being touted as really powerful, such as AI, we're basically looking at something that is stupid and that doesn't have a real direction to it, and certainly not a path that is purposefully being taken. We're looking at individual interests, ad hoc decisions, short-term actions based on short-term benefits. We're looking at egotism, we're looking at ignorance, we're looking at all sorts of, well, stupidity, really, working together to give us the society that we have. There is no goal there, there's no conspiracy, there is just synergy. And synergy, of course, means that certain things align and work together, increase each other's reach and increase each other in power, so that you get certain feedback loops and so on. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to present a model to you which I think applies to society. Now, I know I am taking a serious risk here in that what I will be discussing might seem like a conspiracy theory. And I want to stress that it is not. It is a model, which means it's always oversimplified, that I think applies to democratic, relatively free societies like the one you might well live in, because a lot of people do. I will show you the scheme and we'll walk through it, and I'll be talking about it. So here we are. Lorenz organized, societal, synergetic model of exploitation. I've called it tongue-in-cheek. Now, it's really important that you realize that everyone is part of what we might call the public, the people. That means basically everyone. Being part of the people, you will need your needs met, whatever needs they are, but think mostly of food, health, somewhere to live, drinks, education, and so on. You are able to create a small company if you want. You can consume, you can save money, and I hope you're able to do so, and you can pay taxes. You can do more, but that's what's important for this. Now, there's a little bit of society that is formed by the very rich. That's why I've also made these forms, these shapes overlap. Now, I've also had to put it much bigger than it actually is, because the very rich are, of course, a very small group, but you wouldn't be able to read what I've got here if I've actually made the size of the letters proportional here. So bear with me. Now, the very rich are part of the public, of course, but basically they're in a league of their own. They're a rather different beast from you and me, because these are not people that will have to have a day job or even get some sort of benefits from the government in order to survive. These are not people who actually need to save unless they're living very, very lavishly indeed. These are people who basically, despite what they're doing every day, live off what we call rent, meaning wealth generated by what they already own. Money breeds money. You need money to make money, and these people live off that. Society and especially financial organizations are arranged around making that happen. Now keep in mind, we've touched on that subject before, that money is a construct. It is a fairy tale we all believe in, and it serves the very rich. So these people, of course, do probably run their investment portfolios and so on, and you might call that a job, and sometimes, often perhaps, they have a job such as CEO and so on, and perhaps other things, but basically they don't need to do that. They can live of what they, earn, if that's the word we want to use, by doing nothing. To put that in perspective, if you have several 100 million euros, pounds, yen, whatever, and you get a few percent interest of that every year because you've invested it or put it on the bank, put it somewhere where it can actually generate interest, you're looking at several million a year that you get by doing nothing. That's the kind of thing we're looking at. And a few percent may actually be a small estimate here. Now, the very rich own big companies, and those, of course, are created for profit. Now, big companies, especially in a capitalist society that you probably live in, want to have as few limitations to creating money as possible. And how do they make a profit? Generally by directly or indirectly profiting off the public. You buy their products, you buy their services, you are more or less obliged to make use of what they provide. Though generally you will also have a lot of freedom in whether or not you actually use that. And of course, advertisements and so on are being used to make you buy their things, generally things you don't need, and to profit, and for them to profit off that. The government is, of course, here to legislate. It does other things too, but basically the government is there to make laws, act on them, and enforce them, and make sure that society runs well. So they are there to serve the public, to govern in their interest, to make things safe, to make things livable, to make sure that people can find jobs, to make sure they can find happiness, and so on. That, of course, is part of what the government does. And we need to pay taxes, of course, to make sure the government can actually do that, because all those services need money to be spent. And that money mostly has to come from us. So it is, of course, in the interest of big companies to make sure that the government actually does not regulate and limit them too much. But too much is, of course, a very subjective thing. For a company made to earn money for their owners, for its owner, any regulation may be considered as too much, and limits are there to to limit the actual profit that can be made. So it is in the interest of big companies and thus their owners to influence the government so that it doesn't use too many rules, that it doesn't have too many laws that actually limit the profit that can be made. Big companies will thus try to influence the government, and we use the euphemism lobby for that, but it really means influencing to make sure that the government acts in the interests as much as possible of those big companies. So there's an animosity here. The good way to put this would be a sort of balance in that the big companies try to limit the power of government and thus the way they can run themselves. And in turn, the government seeks to limit the negative influence big companies can have on the public, their means of profiting of them. However, generally speaking, this works more this way than the other way. The big companies will, and their owners, they'll generally think the government influences them too much and limits them too much. The government, of course, is in a democratic society partially elected by the public. Now, mostly when we think of the government, we're thinking of politicians. And politicians are partly elected, but of course, the people who do most of the grunt work in government, who do most of the actual governing, are, say, the bureaucracy, are the council workers, are the people who actually have a permanent or semi-permanent position in government and who are not elected, and generally are the ones who know more about their wing of government than the elected politician does. The elected politician is there mostly to serve as the face and the spokesperson of the government and to lead, or at least be the face of the so-called deep state, you could say, the people who actually run things. When I say that, I don't mean to say that they run things negatively. They can, but generally speaking, you will find that most people who work in government, especially on the smaller levels, are people who do have the best interests of the people and of the citizens, meaning also themselves, but also you in mind. Coming back to big companies, we have, of course, small companies as well. Now, big companies like you to think of them as the cool, rich big brother of small companies, meaning, say, local shops or meaning local manufacturers, people who are generally likable people who try to do their best and help people using their work, but also make a living of that. However, that is in the interest of a big company to be considered something very similar to such pleasant, to such beneficent creatures, you could say. But a big company actually compares to a small company like a whale compares to krill. They are massively bigger creatures that benefit, that live of the work provided by small companies in the end and also by the public. They are not in the same league, even though for public interest reasons, it's better for big companies to be thought of that way, at least for themselves. Now, both big companies, and I can't emphasize this enough, meaning the very rich, and the government own media. Now, some media are, of course, run by the state, others are run by the big companies, and all of them report and provide entertainment. Now, providing entertainment is something that can be pretty neutral. You can choose whether or not to make use of it. You can choose whether or not to spend your money on it. And Generally, entertainment is meant, well, to entertain you, even though they're all meant to make money, of course. Though this is not the case for government owned entertainment media, though of course there's also a profit element in there. So the media, of course, informs you, it influences you too. Here we have this pattern showing you that the people are informed and influenced by the media, and the ones that want to report news will generally fall into three categories. You've got the ones that try to do their very best. Generally, these are small media to actually inform you well. These are the ones that are not, at least not directly run by big companies, because they actually want to inform you well, as neutral as possible, perhaps, or even though they might have a certain goal in mind there too, but at least they want to inform you. Then there are the ones who try to do their very best to do so, but are obstructed by their owners and thus limited in the way they can do that. And then there are the ones who are basically propaganda machines for either a government, a big company, or both. You will understand that the type of media you're looking at really has a lot of impact on how you get informed and influenced. Now, the media also entertains. Even news is meant to entertain up to a certain degree, because it's not said for nothing that if it bleeds, it sells, meaning that the media also use shocking news to profit off that and to basically entertain you in a terrible way. It's a cynical way of putting it, but it's really what happens. I also get entertained, you could say, by knowing what takes place in the world, and I might enjoy actually getting annoyed by it. Now, the media, as you can see, is in alignment with big companies and the government, especially when we're talking about mass media. So suppose we've got a story that is negative for big companies. Well, big companies might lobby the government in order to suppress the story or give it a different spin. The media can then using the government, be informed of that, but only report what the big companies want to report. And big companies can also directly influence what media tell. So in the end, you're looking at media that are largely influenced one way or the other by big companies when they're mass media. And keep in mind that the big companies are being owned by the very rich. So the very rich have a large impact on what actually is reported by mass media. And thus, we are informed by a mass media that is up to a certain degree, and of course the degree to which this is true is can vary very much by what the very rich want you to know. And of course the media also reports on external distractions. The Romans used the term panem et circenses for that, meaning bread and circuses. We also have manufacturoversies, non-issues here, things that are meant to entertain, light-hearted human interest stories, you could say, but also things to make you angry at, well, people who might not actually be influencing your life negatively, but are being scapegoated for that. Immigrants are a very useful target for that, are a very useful external distraction, because lots of people are easily angered by the thought that other people who are undeserving are influencing their lives negatively. They are people who can be very easily used for that. But you can also think of other things that would seek people's attention, that will grab their attention, and which will let them not be informed of what they should be informed about, which is mostly what those big companies are up to. Cynical though it is, a war or a natural disaster also falls into that external distraction category, at least for the purposes of the very rich and the big companies they own. Now, Mostly this takes place ad hoc. So we're not looking at a very aligned plan that makes this happen. But the part of the synergy is that this is actually, I think, what happens in society. And the public, of course, are distracted by all this happening so that they don't notice this part that much, or at least not the degree it takes place in. We all know that the rich get richer, but the degree to which the degree to which we are and the world in general is being exploited for that goal, we generally have a limited view of. Now let's use an example from my country and from Europe in general, in which this works. So we have these big agro companies that really have a terrible impact on the world. They cause lots of pollution, they cause lots of animal suffering, they cause a lot of negative effects for the people. The people are being profited of by being offered, for example, pesticide sprayed vegetables and factory farm grown food, meat, in this case eggs and so on. And big companies of course want to keep doing that. Now the government thought of certain plans and laws to limit the extent to which this can happen because it's not in the interest of the people. Now big company lobbyists have influenced government in order to postpone all sorts of laws. However, this was not enough. A few years ago, there were serious plans to curtail the big agro companies so that their negative impact would be limited, and also run into their profit stream, disrupted. So the media were being used to create all sorts of sympathy for poor farmers, because sympathy for big companies will generally not happen, but sympathy for poor farmers, now that is something you can rely on, mostly because a lot of the people and of the public have little idea of actually what happens at a farm and what is really done in our so-called interest there, and also not of the way that the farmers are being exploited, milked, you could say, by the big companies. Instead, the blame is put by the media, influenced by the big companies, but also by lobbyists working in the government itself, infiltrated, you could say, to create sympathy for those farmers and put the blame on the government itself as being a mean exploiter of farmers. Result, politicians pretending to act in the best interests of the farmers were elected to government. The media are influenced by them because those politicians also show up in the media. Lobbyists can work their government even harder. The big companies profit and the public is exploited. So this is an example of how that actually works. Now, I'll end my discussion of this with that. So this concludes my video. I hope you found it plain and sane and also educational. And I hope you will use this information to your best interest later in life. Now, if you feel like sharing this video, go ahead. And if you really think you should follow me, I'd be delighted to be followed by you. So please subscribe to my channel then. See you next time. Bye.